Well, good afternoon, everyone. We've hit the bewitching hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think this is what we call the faithful remnant. You've made it through the whole day, and it's the last session of the day. My name is Kevin Bowling. I'm court administrator and referee in Ottawa County, Michigan. I cover the circuit court and the probate court as a court administrator there. And then we also have Laura Catalino.
Good afternoon.
And Laura is representing the district court. And as we talk a little bit about the electronic content management project that we've gone through in Ottawa County, we've included all of the courts there, circuit, district, and probate, and other departments in the county as well that we'll talk about a little bit. Just as a point of full disclosure here, this is titled A Court Administrator's Perspective, and I may have a perspective, but when any of you ask any of those detailed questions, I'm going to throw a softball to Laura, because Laura is actually the power user in the group. I'm not on base day in and day out. As we walk through some of our experience and how we got to the point where we are, how we decided to use it, I can explain all of that. If you've got detailed questions about all of the workflow intricacies,
that's me.
She's your person. So we'll be tossing this back and forth a little bit. But just to try to set up and get things started a little bit, we were thinking about the evolution of document management. And we threw a few pictures in just to think of all of the different ways that we have looked at records management over the years, especially in the court environment. And it dawned on me after we put this together that the one picture that I missed out on was the quill pen, where we used and relied on that for a long time. And we're still looking at ways to evolve and to build electronic content management in our courts. One of the things that we talked about, and Laura, you might have some specific thoughts about this as well, but from the picture standpoint, these are reminiscent of a few file rooms that, for those of you that were in the Friend of the Court session a little bit earlier today, there were some other pictures as well. But part of what prompted us in Ottawa County to start looking at ImageSoft and looking at OnBase and trying to figure out this electronic content management are all of the problems that are listed here. The paper files. Courts historically live and die by the paper. It's said that the courts speak through its written orders and judgments. So we have to maintain, or believe that we have to maintain that paper. So we've got all of these paper files. When we're working, at least from the circuit court side, not so much with district or with probate court, but we work with our county clerk's office, and there are a lot of county clerk's offices like ours that have off-site storage and are paying a premium for off-site storage for records because we run out of room in courthouses. So that's it. We've heard already in some of the other sessions today the risk of missing or lost files. It's that wonderful experience where you've got somebody that's ready to go into the courtroom, you've got a judge ready, you've got a jury ready, you've got a prosecutor ready, you've got a defense attorney ready, and where the hell's the file? It's missing in action, and nobody can find it. And so we've got people running around like crazy or sending emails around and trying to figure out where that is.
And that's one thing that I would like to interject is because we've had this happen. We have files and files, and if you misfile something, it's gone. You're going to find it when you pull that file for a case, in a few months. With the OnBase system, once it's scanned, nothing can ever be lost. I mean, somebody somewhere can find it. So it's such a safety for us because you can't lose things. It's just an amazing thing.
And that ties directly back into customer service. How well are we providing a high level of service to the people coming in and trying to use the courts? You can read through some of these other problems. One thing I wanted to touch on was the no disaster recovery situation and the potential problems with paper files. Most people that I've worked with over 30 plus years in the courts have never experienced a disaster. with their files. Their file rooms have been there 100 years. They're going to be there for another 100 years. And they don't see that as an issue. One of the things that I've seen in the last several years working at a national level with the National Association for Court Management is I have an opportunity to talk with people in courts all over the country. I have a good friend who was the court administrator of the criminal court in New Orleans. When Katrina hit, they had a disaster. All of their files were paper. They lost them all. Everything was gone. I know some other folks that are court managers in Iowa. A few years ago, you might have seen situations where there are floods in Iowa. Their court records rooms were destroyed. All of the files were gone. You might get a little bit of recovery back, but if they had an electronic content management system, they wouldn't have had that problem. In fewer situations, going back several years, I spent a number of years working with the State Court Administrative Office. And in that time as a regional court administrator, I spent some time moving around to different courts. I watched a situation at one point where Branch County was hit with a tornado, and some of their records were damaged. There was a situation with the 9th District Court in Kalamazoo that I was involved in, where their file room was in the basement of the courthouse, and it was flooded, and their records were destroyed. So all I'm trying to point out is that when we look at some of these traditional docket problems or records management problems, that disaster recovery can be pretty important to take a look at. When we started looking at benefits, I'm not sure, Mike, if you were the one that told us all of these benefits, or if we learned them on our own or from talking with other folks. But we learned very quickly that the elimination of hard copy files was something that was beneficial. I don't know, with a show of hands, how many of you were in the Friend of the Court session a little bit earlier today? A few of you were. One of the things, we couldn't eliminate all of our files in the county clerk's office, but one of the things we did when we shifted over to the on-base solution is that we did eliminate all of our files in the Friend of the Court office. We had an entire file room that was set up, and we were able to reallocate all of that space for staff in different ways because we eliminated the files. We shredded them. You know, Laura talked a little bit about the rapid retrieval and distribution and the multiple users. Do you want to comment on that anymore?
We can go for it and
okay.
We'll get into it later.
Customer service, you know, it's unbelievable, the difference. I expected, because it's a much higher volume, that we were going to hear more about that immediately in the district court or in the circuit court. But as a court administrator, where I got the immediate feedback from staff was in the probate court area, frankly, from a customer service standpoint. They were the first people that came to me and said it's amazing because they're dealing with a lot of folks that are either elderly, infirm, maybe have a mental illness, have some kind of disability that can't easily get to the court, or may not have the attention span to stay on the phone if they're calling in. And our probate staff said, and these were folks that were dragging their feet to begin with. Some of you might know some of my probate staff. But they didn't want to go down this road. And when they got there and figured out they no longer had to go to a file room to look for a file, they no longer had to dig for records. They know that if somebody called in or stopped at the window, they could give them information immediately because it was all imaged. They could pull up the case file. They had immediate access to the information. So the improved customer service was unbelievable. We're going to talk a little bit more about this cost savings issue. In some ways, the jury is still out a little bit. I think you had mentioned from Washtenaw County's standpoint in the last session that when you're trying to make the case for this, it all comes down to return on investment. And that's how you make the case. We have some good news on return on investment and something that we hope eventually is going to be better news with a few changes that we'll talk about in a minute. From a benefit standpoint, Scott, I saw you come in. Scott provided me with this slide, I believe, at one point when we were putting this together, putting another presentation together. But from an end user standpoint, what we found to be the most beneficial in all of the electronic content management installation was this workflow automation. It was something, I don't want to say it was painful getting there, but it was difficult, and it required a lot of attention to detail, and required us at a local level to get our staff to rethink how we do business. It's really forces you into a process improvement mindset if you don't have that in your court or in your organization already. But when we started looking at workflow, if you can see the small actors here, we've got the court here, prosecutor, law enforcement, public access, the county clerk's office, the ImageSoft, and you can add in other players in your given situation. But where we saw the real beauty of this kind of implementation, it's in the workflow. That's where the benefits come. We can try a lot of different things with electronic imaging, with file management and things like that, but when you can start moving the paper or getting rid of the paper and moving the information electronically to the different players in the system, that's really where we saw the benefit. And Laura, I think that was your experience in district court as well.
I came into district court about 6 months before we implemented the workflow. So we were in that dual process of we're scanning things, we're still using paper files. It was a nightmare. For me, it wasn't so bad, and as we started implementing the workflow, I took to it very quickly because I wasn't used to the old way. Some other team members had some other choice words about it. But it was so easy to transition into, and now, I mean, we're working with police agencies, circuit court. I don't have to run up 3 flights of stairs if I need a document. I don't have to go out to a different building. We have, in district court, we have 3 different separate locations, so we can trade work. We can, if they're behind and we're caught up, we can jump right into their specific workflow and do their work. So it's efficient. You're working with all aspects of the county, and it's just, there's so many benefits to it that I still don't know. We've been using it in district court nearly 5 years now, and I still find things every day that I just love about it, and that help with the other departments and customer service.
Mm-hmm. And we could, if you're interested in more detailed stories or experiences of how we used it, even up to yesterday, before coming over here, I was in a meeting with some of the folks from our county IT department, one of our judges, and we were looking specifically at neglect abuse cases where we did not have a fully developed workflow system that was set up, and there were some other people that were involved that weren't getting the right kind of information. We were trying to figure out how to streamline the process. And for the ImageSoft folks that are here, you all know Sil from our IT department. Sil was sitting in the meeting, very quiet as he usually is, scratching his head, and said, well, why don't we create a workflow for this, and we'll just set it up and it will solve everybody's problem. And it was an application that we had never thought about years ago when we went into this system. So we're, as Laura's saying, we're continually finding new things. To give you a little perspective about the involvement and what we've gone through in Ottawa County, when we started this off, and as Mike recognized earlier, Dan Kruger, our county clerk, had approached me early on and said, do you think we can get some judges' buy-in to do something like electronic content management? And we gradually moved that. We ended up having a whole laundry list of folks that jumped on board when we started talking about the idea. You can see, as Laura mentioned, we've got several different locations for the district court that are spread out around the county in different buildings, all with different file rooms. With the circuit court, we've got several different divisions that are spread out around the county. We've got a trial division in one place, juvenile services in a couple of other locations. We've got our friend of the court office. All of that's built into it. And then we've got county clerk's office, probate court, sheriff's department. Steve Cry is here and retired from the sheriff's department, but he was one of the movers and shakers with the sheriff's department when we first started with this. Prosecutor's office is on board, community mental health, and as Laura mentioned, we've added some police agencies local police agencies that are tied in. You know, something that I don't know if any of you are from circuit court operations, but just recently, within the last week or so, there's it looks like there may be a new legal requirement on with DHS on a removal of kids, emergency removal of kids from home, and now we may need to have some kind of 24/7 operation where a judge or a referee is available around the clock to be able to deal with emergency removal petitions. Well, that might be something that we can handle through a new workflow. Renee?
DHS actually has a view only in our county to look at for neglect and abuse cases to see which all are dual wards.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's why I was getting all excited in the last session that we had in this room where they're talking about the iPad applications. I think DHS recently has given all of their caseworkers around the state iPads and iPhones, and maybe there's a way we can blend these two ideas and make that work.
And Pernay makes a very good point with the fact that all of these different divisions are on base, but if I have a landlord-tenant file that also is in circuit court doing things, I can look at that file. I can't make changes to that file. I can just view the papers in it. So it's very user-friendly with the fact that I don't have to bother another staff person in order to get my questions answered. So that's what Pernay was saying with the view-only aspect of it.
A couple of notes we made over here on the side is, you know, that we've got, I think we're closer to 500 employees now that are spread out in different locations that are actively using this solution. And we have a 1.23 million that was the initial county investment. As I think back about this, and Scott or Mike, you might be able to remind me, but it seems to me that the on-base part, the going into the Highland software, it was more like 785,000. It was a lower amount. And then one of the things that we did was contract out for backfiling, where we went back and looked at trying to add files in to go back a certain number of years, either in the prosecutor's office or the friend of the court office or the county clerk's office, to try to populate the system right out of the gate so that we could have active files that were working. So we've got several years experience with this so far. Some of the things that we did with the implementation is to look at it gradually. We had to figure out and make some decisions at the front end what kind of case types were going to be involved. Were we going to include everything? Were we going to limit it? And developing workflows. In one of the sessions I was in earlier today, there was some discussion about the importance of being very careful and very methodical in dealing with workflows and outlining those. And I can't tell you how many times people got frustrated and wanted to walk away from the table, but we kept them going and they stuck with it, and by really in a detailed fashion making progress through development of all the workflows, it really provided us with a much more robust solution in the end that solved our problems. We had to add judges in our list. I don't know what it's like in your counties. We had a mixture of judges. Some were right on board and were ready to go, and some weren't that interested, frankly. So it was a matter of continuing to work with them. But in the court environment, we know that we have to have judge buy-in. We have to have judge involvement to make things work. So that's why it was really important to us. From a staffing standpoint, we looked at reorganizing some staff assignments and paper flow to mimic the electronic workflows. That was a big deal for us. I think John from Genesee County was talking about the friend of the court experience in Genesee, where he didn't really have a good understanding of what everybody was doing day in and day out. But when you write it down on paper and figure out how the process works going from one desk to another desk to another desk, eventually you can get a sense of how efficient the process is and whether there's redundancies. In our situation, by going with OnBase and working through this effort, we found a lot of redundancies in our process. And I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you did it as well in
Absolutely.
district court, but we had people chasing each other's tails from time to time and doing things that were totally unnecessary. And when we were able to get that out of the process, what we found is that we were able to save time and money, especially in staff hours, to be able to direct people towards more productive work.
And and with the workflow, it's kind of this idea of you only have one person touching the paper one time. The paper, I mean, it's not even a paper. The electronic document. You don't need it to go. At least in district court, it doesn't need to go through 3 or 4 people. I scan it. I work on it. I send it to the judge. I send it out. I mean, it's that easy.
When we were putting this together, I don't want to be flippant about this, but I want to make a point. When we started thinking about a power user and appointing a power user, Laura objected to me putting in a picture of her with her Superwoman outfit on. But she really is a power user, and I think anybody that goes through this kind of implementation will realize very quickly that you need to have power users that are spread out in different offices. Somebody's really got to take the bull by the horns, got to understand the system, understand what the workflows are, and be able to articulate either what's needed or what's broken or what needs to be fixed or what direction we need to go in. This is my picture. This is really the role I was in. As a court administrator, I had to be a cheerleader. And one of the things that we found in our experience, and other experiences may be different, but in our situation, there is no way in this lifetime that we would have gotten the kind of investment that we got out of the County Board of Commissioners, or the kind of buy-in from the judges, or the ability to maintain staff morale at a high enough level to keep going, unless there was a cheerleader in each division, each court, each building. So that was part of the role I played. I may not have understood all of the details of the workflow process. When I fill in as a referee from time to time, I have to get into the system. I have to use it. I have to find documents. I had to learn originally the iSign, now the TrueSign piece. I've got to know how to certify records, but I don't do it day in and day out. What I can do is encourage people to do it because I understand the fundamental benefits of the system. So that's where we say generating the excitement, having a cheerleader on one side, and then having Superwoman or Superman there to make sure that you've got sufficient horsepower to get the job done.
You had a question over there.
Roll.
Kevin, did you have any trouble when you reorganized your staff assignments with union contracts or anything like that?
It's a very good question, and the answer is yes, we did. We have, in our court situation, we've got, I'm not sure about the district court, but we've got several associations and unions. So our friend of the court office is one union. My juvenile officers and detention workers are a separate union. There's another group that's an association that represents most of the district court employees. So we had to have conversations with them. It didn't get to the point where we had to bargain contract changes, in our experience. It may be different for others, but we were able, I can at least say for the friend of the court and for the juvenile services associations, we were able to work out agreements with them so that it was not impacting those positions.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just give one example of one of those paper flow to electronic workflow changes that required staff change?
Well, one of the, trying to think of some examples of the paper flow. In the county clerk's office, they had, for the circuit court records coming through, they had everybody doing everything. And in essence, nobody was responsible for everything. As a result of going through the workflow, what they did was to reorganize their office into a civil division, a criminal division, a family division, and they focused people's attention. Before we started with ImageSoft, my numbers might be off a little bit, but I believe the county clerk's office had, for 2 or 3 years running, put in requests for 3 or 4 new positions in our annual budget process. And the county was not adding staff at that point. When we went through that, I think they had, through attrition, lost 2 positions, and they found they didn't need to fill them. So no longer were they asking for more positions, they were actually able to do with less because they realized that there were redundant activities that didn't have to be done any longer. Some benefits. You want to touch on any of these, Laura?
I want to touch on all of them. This is my favorite slide, and it's the most important. First, we have accessibility. And like I talked about before, you can get into different workflows. You can custom query different things. You guys can read these for yourself, so I'm not going to read them to you. But the accessibility is amazing. And I sat in on the mobile on-base thing, and I just was sitting in the back getting all excited about it because it's just amazing the fact that I could be here and just looking through documents to make sure people are doing it right back at the office or whatever. So the accessibility of it is, like a personal example, I had a kidney problem. I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks last fall, and my team was kind of in over their head. Other people could jump in from different locations. They didn't need to send someone 20 miles to our location to do that. So it's really, it's very, very good. You can also get right on the phone with somebody. I'm on my headset and I can pull up the document. I don't need to get up and walk to the filing cabinet, put that person on hold, pull the file, look through the file, and find all these things. It's indexed. I can find a complaint. It's right there. I can go over what these people are asking me. I can look at the document. A lot of times, this is a very common one I get is, well, I didn't get served that paper. Well, yes, you did. I'm looking at it right in my computer. And so the accessibility of the documents and the other, the other people the other departments that are using it is just very, very top notch. The efficiency, you're just working so quickly. Our mail comes in about 10 o'clock, it's scanned, and by 4 o'clock, those papers are out and done. When we were using typewriters, which I despise, we were taking days to get these things done. So it's just, things are getting so much quicker, and it's funny now to me because if we get a little behind or our judges are on vacation, you get the regular attorneys that will call and say, well, is everything okay? Why is my stuff taking so long? And it's like they're so used to the speediness of it now that they are calling and expecting it that quick. The consistency, again, I can only sign my name to things. The barcoding that we put on our documents matches the case number. It pulls into our justice system. It's all very consistent. It's all the same. We actually went through and cut down some indexing codes for district court. I know circuit court's a little bit different, but we cut them down so that for the judges' benefits, it's easier for them to look up things. It's what it says is what it is, and the accountability portion of it is huge. Like I said, with the misfiling, that's a problem, but the accountability of it keeps a history of whoever has we don't have terms necessarily to use for this, but whoever has pulled up that document, viewed that document, marked up that document, signed that document, whoever has done that, there's a history of it all. You can see, there's reports that can be generated of who has scanned that day, what batch things were scanned in. So from the point of scanning to the point of distribution, it's all accounted for, and even, it's just as great. And people can say, well, I didn't do that. Well, yes, you're the last person to touch that document on June 6th at 4:45. You can get that detailed, so it really makes staff be accountable, which is scary, but in the same sense, it really ups your staff and makes them, more. They watch what they're doing, and I'm not even management. I'm a clerk, so it's even for me to say that. I have to watch what I'm doing. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
There are a lot of other benefits, and if you have a copy of the slides, there are some others that are in there. I know that when Mike and others from ImageSoft came in and met with us initially, they can go through and they can tell you what all of these benefits are. But I can tell you from the trenches standpoint, there's nothing like having a staff person have that aha moment where you implement a new solution and they realize, even if they had their heels dug in and were working against it at first, that this really makes my life easier. It makes it easier for me to do my job, and instead of having people lined up 10 deep at the counter yelling at me, I can actually take care of them in a timely fashion. And they're happier. They're happier, I'm happier. You know, there's a lot of satisfaction that can come out from these benefits as well. So I'm just going to bypass the next one and look on to some challenges. It's not all chocolate and roses. There are those days, there are those times where there are challenges that we hit along the way. And when Laura and I were talking about this, we thought the only way we could do an honest presentation about our experience is to look at some of the challenges as well. And they may be ones that you've already faced or that you are going to face. But we have staff attitude. I don't know if, it's that wonderful human condition that sometimes as managers we have to deal with. Laura had mentioned that she may not be in management in the district court, but she hears it as well. We can see at times when people don't want to do something or they're afraid of change, and that creates some attitude, and in some cases some turnover. I think the friend of the court from Genesee County mentioned that a lot of the folks that in his office retired when they brought in the system. And they found out afterwards they didn't have to fill the positions because the workflow helped them do their jobs more efficiently. So there are some of these challenges. One of the things that we ran into is occasionally there were technical difficulties or hiccups. And when that did happen, sometimes it was because those of us that were sitting around in smaller groups creating the workflows knew enough to be dangerous, but maybe didn't know everything that folks at Laura's level knew, and we may not have created the workflow properly. We may have missed a step somewhere along the line. So there were difficulties like that we'd come up against and realized that we needed to retool things. And that's where the ImageSoft staff were extremely helpful in terms of coming in and suggesting things. When we started this, Scott or Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure how many implementations you might have had at that point with as many different courts and departments involved. And I don't know if we were unique in that sense. But we were both learning. We were learning side by side. I think ImageSoft was learning some things from our implementation that now they don't have to worry about. They've got it knocked. But we were struggling our way through it. So there were some hiccups along the way. And every time that happens, again, the cheerleader has to come back out and say, it's okay, we're going to get there. This really is going to be beneficial for you. And maybe Steve had the hardest part as a cheerleader. He was a cheerleader for the Sheriff's Department. At least my staff weren't carrying guns. So he was in danger trying to push this from time to time. So those are some challenges. Backfile conversions were a challenge for us. We had a number of different courts and departments. We had circuit, district, probate, our friend of the court operation, sheriff's department, prosecutor, and people made different choices with backfiling. Our prosecutor's office, for instance, made a conscious decision that because of the confidential nature of the files, they did not want to send those out to an outside company to backfile and to preload some of those cases in the system. So they had to figure out from a cost standpoint what the overtime was going to cost, what the extra hours were going to cost to get the system up and running with some older cases. On the court side, we decided to go with an outside company to backfile, and we had a mixed experience with that. With cases that were pretty straightforward, pretty routine, pretty much the same information. The backfiling company did a great job. When we got to some more complicated cases, like anyone here from a friend of the court office? You know that some of your case files or cases will last for 18 years or more, and sometimes you talk about the box cases, where you bring the files in banker boxes at a time. When you start going through one of those box cases, it's a little bit confusing for somebody who doesn't even know what the friend of the court office is, but they're sitting at some remote location trying to scan in documents. In our situation, we found that we ended up having to go back and redo some of the work that was done by the outside scanning company because things were in the wrong place. And that set us back a little bit. So if the moral of the story is if you've got complex files and you need to be very careful about how they're indexed, you may want to do that, figure out how to do that with your own staff that are familiar with those files as opposed to going to an outside company. If you've got a more straightforward group of files, it may work very, very well. I think we've talked about some of these things. A challenge that I'm going to show you on another slide in a minute is this last bullet with the legal interpretations on record retention, seals, and signatures. And there have recently been some legal changes there that significantly benefit in on-base implementation, and we'll come to that in a minute. Are there any other challenges, Laura, that you wanted to touch on in particular?
I think we covered most
Good
of
there.
them.
So some of our lessons learned in our situation, hand-on demonstrations. Anything you can do, it's training, training, and training. Getting staff used to using the system, and for staff and judges, that was very important. The communication piece.
Yes, that's big. Our judges still call me up and say, "Now, how do I do this?" And I'll run back to his office and have to show him, or I have, they put on a new sticky note or some sort of something that you just kind of find, and it's important to keep that communication open and have, like Kevin said, those power users that know when the updates are coming, know when those things are happening, and to make sure the staff knows that that's happening.
In our situation, we have multiple locations. We've got court operations running all over the county, and we found in some respects it sometimes helped with our implementation to start out in one location and kind of master the process and then take it to another one and to another one, as opposed to trying to implement everybody at exactly the same moment, because then if you've only got a few cheerleaders like me, it's hard to be in several places at once to keep everybody geared up and going.
The only problem we ran into that one, at least in district court, was none of the judges wanted to go first. They all wanted one of the other judges to do it first. But we got it figured out.
Yeah. And for our implementation, we've got that third bullet point there that says plan it based on how the work flows between the departments. We had a fortunate situation where the Sheriff's Department, under Steve's leadership, had previously done some imaging. So they had folks that were used to using some kind of electronic content management. But from the criminal side of things, to follow the workflow and get the Sheriff's Department installed, and then the prosecutor's office installed, and then seeing the files flow to the district court and having them installed, and then coming up, when they get bound over to the circuit court, following that kind of process makes sense. I heard the Genesee friend of the court mention, if you're looking from a friend of the court standpoint, that it was really helpful to have the friend of the court and the county clerk's office go together if you're going to implement at the same time, because of the crossover of documents that are frequently used there. Some of the things that we saw where we thought we could improve, training, and more training. And that's something that we're still doing. And what we find is that even when we think we've got it knocked and we've got everybody trained, somebody retires. Or we've got a new staff person that comes in, and we're starting the cycle again. So trying to document some of that training and having those updates. We found that updates to the system and updates to the training became more important as regular users became more proficient with the system. Because as they learned more about how to use it, they started asking more questions. Well, why can't I do this? Or why can't I do that? Or, you know, can we create another workflow to do X, Y, and Z because it'll make my life easier? So as people start to use the system, they learn more about the capability, and you have to be nimble enough as an organization to provide those updates and keep things going. And Laura, you talked about the security levels, the needing, the ability from a granular standpoint to lock things down so that there aren't unintended changes.
Yeah, like right now, we enter our own warrants, but we don't scan the warrants. So being able to mark those as confidential, not have, but they're in the file, or not have anybody being able to get to them. Another one was letters to our judge from inmates or things like that. Some of those things we are not putting in the paperless file because of the fact that people can pull them up, and we got to figure out, you know, that. So it is. I mean, it's always a work in progress.
Yeah. You know, this hits some of the highlights in the printed materials. You've got a few more slides with some other information that's built in there. But I want to show you one more thing and then stop for some questions if there are any questions. Mention that one of the important things is to build into your implementation process some kind of evaluation. If anyone's interested in looking at an evaluation of an electronic content management implementation, we have a county department, a planning and performance improvement department, that went through and did an evaluation after the first 2 years of our implementation. They went through and collected a lot of data. They studied several workflows. And one of the things that we were able to verify, and this was very important for the county board as our funding unit, we were able to show over 12,000 staff hours saved on an annual basis. We were able to show over 400 overtime hours that were saved as a result of the implementation. We had over 549,000 plus pages less that were copied. We saved on file folders. We saved on Lotus Notes, our email licenses. So there were a number of different verifiable savings that we were able to take back to our board and say this was a good move on your part because of that. But we also found that there are some inefficiencies from the court standpoint in that we're required to have a paper file or in the still, so that we had some judges that were saying, why are we doing this? You know, this is all nice to have all this electronic gadgetry, but we still have to have a paper file, and until the law changes, you know, we're spinning our wheels. And so from a buy-in standpoint, that became a little more difficult. In the probate side, there's a legal requirement for microfilm. You know, things are acceptable for long-term record retention if they're on paper or they're microfilm. And those are our only choices. So we started looking at some of these as barriers, whether it's the microfilm issue or questions about how to migrate from one system to another. And again, you've got this information. We also found a statute that where digital media is not understood to be human readable. So if you wanted to look at a particular statute, it says that for long-term record retention, you've got to have a document in a human readable form. Well, until we get that statute changed, then we can use electronic content management for daily purposes, but it's much more difficult for long-term record retention. So we're working on some of those things.
We're trying to get that changed. That's in the hopper.
If anyone hasn't met Judge Schmucker yet, Chad Schmucker is our state court administrator. So buttonhole him before he leaves and tell him how important it is that we can change.
I know about that.
Already did.
I know about that.
Yeah. So in terms of numbers, the two slides that are probably the most important, going back to your point about the ROI earlier, based on the evaluation we did, the red line looks at the costs of having an electronic content management system in Ottawa County. The yellow line is our savings. And if you know something about return on investment, That's not a good picture. It's not a good picture until the yellow line crosses the red line and starts on an upward path, upward trajectory. So right now, based on our evaluation, we have a negative ROI. But with the recent changes the Supreme Court made allowing for electronic signatures, a law change that we were able to get done in allowing for electronic certification of records, and what we hope soon is going to be a recognition of digital records for long-term record retention, we end up with a much different picture. And that's what our projected ROI is in Ottawa County. So we're thinking just a few years out, based on our investment, we're going to start making money on this system. It's going to save us and gets us back to that issue that you were raising earlier. So that's based on our immediate evaluation. And these are all of those either recent legislative or court rule changes that are allowing us to get to that positive ROI, which is so important. And one of the things that I think Chad's partially responsible for is the State Court Administrative Office has a Technology Implementation Committee that is actively looking at these issues. They're studying them and trying to make some of these changes so that courts can continue to be more efficient, more cost-effective, and be able to go back to our funding units, whether it be a city council, county board of commissioners, or whomever that's providing the funding for the courts, and say we are doing everything we possibly can to be cost-effective here. And I think I'm out of time. So you've got a few future steps that we're heading down, but the bottom line is that continuing on the focus on a positive return on investment. So with that, Laura, anything else you want to add in at this point?
You skipped over the future, but I just wanted to put out one thing. We recently went to our courtrooms now for criminal stuff is going from the courtroom to a gal that takes the notes, puts them on the computer, sends them up to the counter. The defendant comes out of the courtroom. Their file's already at the counter. They can pay. They're out of there. So it's a huge, huge benefit, and we're hoping to develop that a little bit more so that even defendants are happy.
Oh. Any questions before? Yes, sir.
Some years ago, Chad will probably remember, there was money available because they wanted to do a study to really make the state court system a true state court system where everything's connected. This is probably closer to that than whatever really was accomplished and stuff. So then, and at that time, there was some from the Department of Justice and from the state had money for funding for that. Has there? I see you spent 1.23. Is there any state money involved in this, or federal money, or?
There are a couple of different things that go on with different parts of the court, and I could go into more detail if you want to talk after the last session is finished. But with the friend of the court office, things that are 4D related, Title 4D related, you can get 2/3 reimbursement through federal money for implementation. There are some limited applications where we were able to, in our funding process for the juvenile side of this, to add it into our child care fund budget as a way to show that this was directly affecting the treatment and working with juvenile delinquent cases. So we were able to get some funding that way, but it didn't necessarily cover the waterfront, if you will.
So of that 1.23, some of it was reimbursable?
Some of it was reimbursable through our CRP contract, the cooperative reimbursement contract. Some came through the child care fund. And then we also wrote some grants that helped with some of the costs. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Laura, thank you for being the power user.